All right, Gaza War day 467. Ceasefire day -4, I think. Because the ceasefire starts on Sunday. We're recording on Wednesday night. It's day -4.
Are you shocked?
I mean, yeah. Like, I think I'm more shocked on an emotional level than on an intellectual level. I think I've adjusted. This is almost like a tanky therapy, which we're gonna do on Sunday. You should come to that one, John. Come on. You came to one. You should come to the last one. You should
Okay.
come to the last ever one. But go public, please provide comments. Please state in the comments if you want Jon Elmer to be at Tanky Therapy. If we get a sufficient number of comments, I think that'll be solid pressure for him to come. So, but yeah, I think I've adjusted my life rhythm to this genocide to the point where I don't know. I don't know what I'm gonna do. I don't know what I'm gonna do if this holds. I mean, I'm gonna go. I think I think I'm gonna go to Gaza if this holds. But like, yeah. But on an intellectual level, I remember one of our early videos with Nora, you, and me was like basically, can Israel win just by genociding and starvation alone?
No, they can't.
And the answer seems to be a pretty clear no. I mean, whatever else, even if this fails, they're gonna end up right back here again.
Yeah. They achieved none of their stated goals.
There's
The
no
ceasefire,
prospect of them achieving their goals.
no. And the ceasefire is under the exact terms, like literally under the exact terms that
Yeah.
Qassam presented to them. And even this first stage where they're,
Yeah.
yeah, well, so we should say we're not sure about the document yet. The document hasn't been released, but because it's from May, there's been enough leaks
Mhm.
of the document that we have a good idea. But
Wait,
they're,
Tarek sent me something in Arabic. Maybe he sent it to you too. So is that text from
yeah, there's
May?
an Arabic text and there's a Hebrew text
Okay.
and there's an English text because the document is exactly the same. And Qassam never backed down from any of its demands. Israel was unable to achieve, or didn't even really try to achieve. The idea that they were going to put pressure on Qassam to hand over the prisoners was never a thing. And in
I
the
mean,
end, the deal looks exactly like it looked 8 months ago, which is like disgusting. And
yeah.
I can't believe that this is the world that we live in. And even the first stage of the document, the first stage of the release is the release that could have been done by the end of November
November.
2023. If Israel had just given Qassam 10 days,
Yeah.
5 days to find out where the rest of these captives were that were not being held by Qassam, and part of their like solidarity and unity of the fields is that they never really they kind of said, but they never really outed the fact that most of these prisoners are not being held by them. They were captured by people that were not part of the
Yeah.
October 7th raid, and they had to find them, and they had to
Because the
make some.
October 7th raid, we might as well repeat for everybody in the back, was to take very high value military prisoners that would be exchanged at a very high rate of exchange for all the Palestinian prisoners that are stuck in Israeli prisons.
Yeah, and the expectation on October 7th was that the raid would be difficult
Yeah.
and that they would encounter fierce resistance at each of these bases, and the capturing of soldiers would be a difficult task.
Yeah.
Instead, the Israeli military collapsed like a house of cards. The entire day of October 7th, people were able to come out through the exits that had been through the breaches in the wall, and they took
Many
captives. And
captives.
those
And
captives are being held by people who weren't going to, in November, send SMS messages to each other saying, oh, by the way, I have that family and they're in my
mhm,
house in Khan Yunis.
Mhm.
And that was never a realistic thing. It was never realistic for Qassam because they never wanted to
Yeah.
be the person to send those. Hey, do you have those people? Like those messages, that's a very dangerous operation.
Yeah.
And they needed time to do that. And you can see even in this document that the temporary cessation of aviation, so like no overflight surveillance for
Mhm.
certain hours of the day, that
Yeah.
was that's from November 2023. That
Yeah.
was a way to give Qassam time to find the other prisoners without sending SMS messages or without getting in their car and driving under a drone to find these people. And so there's such it's an unspeakable, it's just such a
Yes.
disgustingly
So they,
grotesque thing that we've watched for the last 8 months. The fact that the actual document is stamped with the day in May, and May was by May, we were already saying on the sit reps, okay, we're not going to get into this anymore. Like, we don't believe
yeah.
this anymore. We're not falling for this anymore
Yeah.
because this actually goes back to
October.
February and
Yeah.
March, right?
Yeah.
And actually goes back to October, but it
Yeah.
goes these negotiations were happening in February and March and April, and we were saying no, we're not going to fall for it.
Yeah.
And it's just the
And
number of people that have died for
let's, yeah, I
no
wanted to just say
purpose.
this because like the Israeli Gaza division collapsed. And what they were ready with and what they did prepare very quickly was this edifice of lies, this edifice of atrocity propaganda. They activated this global network with the essentially the sole purpose of preparing to do the genocide that they did. And all of these media figures bought into it and played it up and participated enthusiastically in the genocide,
Enthusiastically.
hunted down people that we've had, like you, that AI had, Refat. They had people killed. They put targets on people's backs. They were doing it right up until the end with Abu Bakr. And that's what they did. That's what they focused on because that's the kind of world we live in, like you said. That's the kind of thing that they do. Um, and they're not able or willing to go and fight a ground war in Gaza. And I remember when Lebanon ceasefire happened, and you and I met, but like I think the day before or after, you were on EI, you were doing your report, and you said something like Lebanon is uninvadable or something. Basically, like this proves that Lebanon is uninvadable. Like Hezbollah cannot be defeated. It will not be defeated by Israel. And this also, we should, I think it's safe to say, Gaza will not be defeated by Israel. They have thrown everything that they have. They have thrown things they don't have that they got from the Americans. They have done everything.
Yeah. And they had the time to be for their intelligence to adapt, right? So that's the
Yep.
thing is you could say they spent all their attention focused on Hezbollah. They dropped the ball on Qassam. Okay, fine. That's
Fine.
fine in September and
Mm-hmm.
October. But then they carried on this war with
Yeah.
with American surveillance, with British surveillance, with an entire operations room of American intelligence officers who were
Yeah.
tasked round the clock with finding Qassam fighters,
Yeah.
finding where these prisoners were, and they couldn't find anybody. They
And
couldn't.
instead, and instead, you have Tony Blinken yesterday or the day before saying Qassam has replaced all the fighters that they've lost and more.
Yeah, and that I mean, yeah, that was quite a statement in an otherwise like incredibly boring speech. But yeah, that he was saying the American intelligence community believes that they've replaced their entire cadre of killed fighters, which we don't even know how many that is. I would say that they've probably more than replaced it,
Sure.
because when he's saying replaced, they're using the Israeli numbers,
Yeah,
or the
exactly.
American numbers were dialed down by about 80% of what the Israeli numbers were, but the Israelis say they killed 20,000 people, 20,000 fighters. And they went into the war. Israel said that there was 26,000. There's a couple of like funny articles in the Jerusalem Post,
Mhm.
because the Israelis publish these numbers, right? And they keep
Yeah,
publishing numbers and they keep saying they
and they
killed
don't
this
add up.
many people. They just don't add up. They're,
Mhm.
even if you're the biggest propagandist, like the Jerusalem Post, which their newspaper puts the hashtag Hamas is ISIS after their news articles.
Which is weird because ISIS loves them. ISIS loves Israel. So
Yeah, and hates Hamas.
Hamas never apologized for accidentally hitting Israel with a rocket. ISIS did.
Yeah, and Qassam were the ones who were like, we're not putting up with ISIS in our
Yeah,
midst,
that's right.
right? Long before it was cool to do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah, it's absurd, but it's just the numbers that it's just they don't even they can't even lie properly. They said
No,
that
it's
they had
impossible. Yeah.
liquidated, ethnically cleansed the north. They're completely cleansed the north. And then they move into Beit Hanun, and all of a sudden there's thousands of people in Beit Hanun. There's hundreds of fighters that are destroying their
I
forces.
wanted to ask you about that because I've been following everything and you've been following everything, but you follow these things in a level of detail that I don't. And I wanted to ask you, because for me, at the level of detail that I'm following, it did seem to me that there was something remarkable in Beit Hanun over the past few weeks where it was like, what did they just get? Like, did they just get the IDF's number somehow? It was almost supernatural what they were able to do. And so I don't
Yeah.
know, what's your set? Is that
No, it's
right?
exactly true. And the,
Yeah.
the first like 90, we're more than 100 days into the siege of the north, but the first 90 something days were destroying Beit Lahia, which is on the northwest side, the opposite side of the north of Beit Hanun. And that was Kamal Adwan Hospital. And so all
Mhm.
the focus of attention was on Beit Lahia. They access Beit Lahia from the western coast, from the sea. So they come down the coast and into Beit Lahia. And they didn't make it all the way through to Beit Hanun. And then they got the Gaza division. This is the 162nd division that was fighting in the north. They had not gone into Beit Hanun. They rotated in the Gaza division to go into Beit Hanun. And the first hour that they were in Beit Hanun, they had 15 casualties. They're flying helicopters, landing them. They're trying to figure out what's going on. They ultimately, less than a week into it, they had to pull out the Gaza division out of Beit Hanun. They had to rotate them out because they were getting hammered so hard. They sent in the 162nd division, and they sent in their like special forces, like paratroopers. They're supposedly battle hardened guys, and they got hit even harder.
Yeah.
And it's just proof. I mean, I've been saying this all along. They're fighting in territorial brigades. They're
Mhm.
fighting in territorial units. It's not
Right.
the Jabalia camp that's running to Beit Hanun and fighting in Beit Hanun. Beit Hanun was sitting and waiting in their positions. And as soon as the Israelis came in, they get hit immediately. There's not a rotation of forces. They're in battalions in Beit Lahia, Beit Hanun, multiple in Jabalia camp. And that's Jabalia camp is north of Jabalia. I don't think your map has the Jabalia camp, but it's north of the camp. So it's, and again, these are all contiguous. There's all built up area. You can't, when you're driving through Beit Lahia, you're not like, oh, and now I'm leaving Beit Lahia and now I'm in Jabalia
Right.
camp.
Right.
So
No.
like a lot of the news coverage of Kamal Adwan was saying that Kamal Adwan was in Jabalia camp, but it's actually in Beit
Technically in
Lahia.
Bethlehem.
And so they're pushing in from the coast. So you can see they're coming in from the west. which was early in the war was the surprise. Previous wars have always been fought with the Israelis pushing from the east. And what they did was different for this invasion of Gaza is they came down the sea. They came down the coast. And then they went across the Netzarim corridor and then they attacked Gaza City from the south. That was the thing that we were talking about on one of the first ever sit reps was
but it was totally nullified by the fact that this was their defense is territorially based. So it's quite irrelevant the direction that you come from
yeah.
in an urban war like this.
Well, they were trying to avoid having to fight all the way through Jabalia camp. And then Shati is in the beach camp that is a serious fight. They couldn't make it through Shati. Shati was the place they couldn't get through. They couldn't access Gaza City through Shati. They had to come through Tel El Hawa, which is to the south. So they came up from the south. And this was the thing when they reinvaded the north and said that they were going to ethnically cleanse the north. This is now 100 days ago, 3 months ago. That goal that was never going to happen because
those people stayed.
Because and the Shati battalion is still in Shati, and that's why it doesn't matter when you say you're going to ethnically cleanse Beit Lahia. They basically ethnically cleansed Beit Lahia. They pushed every person out of Beit Lahia. But that took 100 days to do. Yeah. And then that's just getting them to the edge of the Jabalia camp. So to ethnically cleanse the north, which is like the settlers, we're going to make settlements in the north.
Oh, yeah.
They're not even in Gaza. Beit Hanun and Beit Lahia are considered farming villages. Like it doesn't really, when you look at it, it doesn't really look like a farming village, but according to their, to the conceptions of the way Gaza is, historically, that's where the farmland is. And so the built up areas, like they were never in cleansing Gaza City. That was never a thing, but they tell themselves that. Army radio tells themselves that they're going to ethnically cleanse the north. And then they weren't supposed to be that long taking Beit Lahia.
And Beit Lahia, I mean, yeah, so we were talking about Beit Hanun, and there were the numbers that were killed in individual ambushes seemed to be much higher. Like, it's like we killed 25, and then the rescue force came and we and I don't know where I read this description. You might know where I read this description, but it was like Israeli soldiers that were like, they have cameras on us all the time. They have unlimited supplies of explosives. It was just this like description. Did you?
Yeah. They were describing, they interviewed one, I think, because they were doing in beds.
Yeah.
But at that point, the Israelis had treated it like that they had won in the north. And so they were sending in these embeds. Haaretz went in, Channel 12 went in. And Channel 12 interviewed soldiers who were like trying to understand why they're getting smoked so bad. And so they're like, oh, it was they took advantage of the weather. They were like, at one point they were like, it has to be friendly fire. Like we have to be shooting each other. They just couldn't understand the fact that the Beit Hanun battalion is still functioning, and you just never went in there.
And there's something funny about the way they kept funneling fresh Israeli troops into these areas, where it's like you're fresh, which is great, but you don't seem to have any idea what's been happening because everything you've been hearing has been wonderful propaganda about how great things have been going.
But also when you have territorial divisions, that territorial division has military intelligence that says, just wait for 5 days. Like we know the route that they're taking. Let's wait 12 days. And that's what happened. The Israelis kept getting blown up on their supply routes, and they kept being like, this was a cleared route. The one in Beit Hanun, they almost got the whole unit. They got the commander, they got the deputy, and they almost got the brigadier general, like the overall Nahal brigade commander almost got it. because they
Mhm.
were like, this road is safe. We could be on our in our Jeeps on this road. But you can even see it's like, did they watch the videos? Because you can watch on the videos where Kassam's like, we watched this building. Like the commander is on the video with all their weapons that the Israelis say that they've captured. We've never seen a weapons array from the Israelis that looks like a Qassam video. We never saw that, right?
Yeah.
We never saw like a table full of Yassins.
Yeah.
And Qassam's making videos this week where
Yeah.
they've got a table full of all their weapons. And you look at that and you're like, we never saw that. We never saw it. Like even the Al Aqsa Martyrs Brigades, like one of the smaller factions at this point in Gaza, they published a rocket installation, like manufacturing assembly plant
Mhm.
where there's fighters are all assembling rockets. And you look at that video, came out just after New Year's. You look at that video, you never saw the Israelis show us what that room looks like that you're making that video in 400 whatever days. I just can't. It's the failure, the level of failure is just, it's remarkable. And it's just like you said, it's all just built on this edifice of lies. So you don't actually, you're never actually talking about the failure because you're
Do you,
talking about these other things that are, yeah, just not.
have I ever read you my favorite doomer, my favorite Israeli doomer, Ori Goldberg?
Oh, I
Ori,
think I've seen him on Al Jazeera a couple times.
he writes, he's like Israeli pessimism, like Zionist pessimism, which is like he's elevated to an art form. So he says, the genocide will never go away. We are spent. The key is that he said we are spent. He says, yeah, here. Israel will do everything within its power to obfuscate the agreement with Hamas. We have nothing but pettiness and oblivion to sustain us. Still, we are spent. We tried to fulfill our fantasy of making the Palestinians disappear. We did not succeed. And I think that's right. Like they built a plan based on a fantasy. And it was it I myself questioned many times over the past 467 days whether this could succeed. I thought, maybe they can starve everybody into submission or bomb everything into submission. And I just kept thinking, I don't think that's possible. But if they're
But you're a
doing it,
fair-minded analyst, right? I did the same thing. I was like, are they going to run out of weapons? How many
yeah,
weapons do they have? Are
right.
they actually in territorial divisions? Like all these
Yeah,
questions we asked because that's what you do when you're like a but the media never asked that question.
right.
They all have military analysts. They all have opportunities all throughout this war to ask the questions. If this war went on for 7 years,
Yeah.
do you think Qassam would lose after 7 years?
No,
There's
no,
no amount of time
no.
that can make up for the failure. And
And I
there's
mean,
nothing that
that's
they can do about it.
what,
There's no collaborators in Gaza.
yeah, there's
They
no partners.
offered millions of dollars and safe passage for people that had captives that were not in the Qassam brigades. If there was ever a time, right? So Qassam can't find all the
That's
captives,
right.
which presumes there's not a relationship between who took them and Qassam,
Exactly.
or else they could get word to each other that they have the various captives, right?
Right.
Even those people didn't take the $5 million and the exit. There
No.
wasn't one instance of people turning over captives.
Right.
There
Right.
wasn't one time where they cracked the communications network and wiped out an entire, even like what you
What they
watched
did
with
to Hezbollah.
Hezbollah. There was no comparable situation in Qassam where they got all of the leaders. or they
Mhm.
got a bunch of leaders in one place.
They
There was no
they got Haniyeh because he was outside. They got Sinwar because he was
by
leading a battle.
accident.
He was
Yeah.
literally leading a small group
Yeah.
encounter. Like,
Yeah, and
uh,
because Sinwar was because there was a
yeah,
training unit
yeah,
that went through protocol that they never went through anywhere else in Gaza. It's very possible. I mean, we talked about this, but
yeah,
it's way more possible that we never heard Sinwar was dead
right.
than for the Israelis to do a battle, like an after action report or a battle damage assessment and go through and actually find that. That was not an intelligence. There's no indication that they killed any of the senior Qassam leadership. And for the ICC, etc., you'd think that the Israelis and the Americans would at least present the thinnest of evidence that they got these guys. There's none.
So
So
it turns out what we've been tracking, I think, was attrition. Economic attrition, military attrition, and the hypothesis that we always had was some some point, some threshold would be too much, and the Israelis would stop because that's what's happened every other time. It's just that the threshold has been much less than this time. So for me, the mystery was always like, how is Israel able to absorb so many casualties this time? How is Israel and somehow like they poured all of this effort into their propaganda, into this October 7th edifice of lies, into this genocidal incitement, and the generation of children that they raised in Israel to be genocidal. And that's probably what's kept them going. But I guess, the indicators that this was more serious of a ceasefire effort were like, number one, you started to see that the Israeli media was trying to condition the Israeli public that this was going to happen. And the other one was people were sending me these things like it looks like they're dismantling some of the concrete fortifications in the Netzarim corridor. And I didn't reply to anybody because people were sending me this, and I was just like, I wanted to reply like I'll believe it when I see it, but this is the kind of thing you believe when you see. Like, this is not, it's not a ruse, right? No, there are lots of ways to do a ruse that don't involve picking up and dismantling concrete fortifications.
yeah, I mean the corridor could always be dismantled in a day. It was always made
Yeah.
up of those concrete slabs that literally you can, like, it's the way the West Bank wall is made too. They have
Yeah.
like little almost like hooks in the top. You could just
Yeah.
come in with an excavator, lift it up, and it's gone.
Yeah.
But there was nothing to the Nitzrim corridor. That was an area for the most part that wasn't populated.
Yeah.
So, they fought to widen the corridor as much as they could because over time the fighters were accessing it. But you can see with this agreement how Netanyahu foiled at every stage the agreement, right?
Yeah.
You simply say, well, we're not leaving the Netzarim corridor. Then the whole deal falls apart when you look at how it's constructed. You can't work around that deal. And Qassam never gave in.
No.
Even in the and this is what history
Hmm.
will reflect on, the fact that they never gave in, even though there was so many dark days where you
Yeah.
could imagine being like, enough,
Yeah.
enough. Like, we'll do whatever we'll
Yeah.
get. Like this
But
winter.
Israel made that impossible for them. Israel made that impossible because Israel structurally doesn't accept surrender. So they also made it clear that you're gonna suffer and die whether you
Yeah, because
surrender
their
or not.
target was the civilians. It
Yeah.
wasn't. It wasn't the.
There's there's no like velvet glove in the mailed fist, right? And the covering the mailed fist. It's always the mailed fist with them. So there's no incentive to surrender. There's no,
It's
I
just
mean,
such cowardice,
yeah.
unbelievable cowardice. And said it the first day of the war, they're just such cowardly fighters. And you can even just see it from the other military people that talk about this. Like the Americans did brutal crimes in
Absolutely.
Iraq, and they still didn't
Yeah.
understand what was happening in Gaza.
Yeah.
You know, one of the most brutal wars. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's dark. It's
So I mean, we've always focused on the military issue and the military question, and I do believe that it was decisive. I believe that this was the point of exhaustion. I even saw signs, I don't know how much to make of it, but I did see signs of like Israeli units saying we don't want to do this anymore. We don't want to go back,
oh, of course. Of course. And they
especially
could
Beit Hanun.
yeah,
Yeah.
they couldn't fight with their reserve units anymore. And that was the thing in Lebanon too, is that their reservists were dying. They can't sustain that. They can
Yeah.
have a big show of how they all drive up to the border, but if you're going to put them into
Yeah.
a meat grinder war, you can't do it. And then they did it kind of because, after October 7th there was whatever esprit de corps within their
Yeah.
military, but when it came time to then re-enlist the next
Mhm.
time, the numbers are basically kept a secret because the less than half people were showing up. People had left the
Nobody wants
country.
to go who's gone. And that also tells you
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
propaganda versus reality. So everybody who's seen the propaganda wants to go. Everybody who's gone doesn't want to go back.
Yeah, and they're all telling you stories that we don't see in the media, like
Mhm.
about how every building blew up and how every around every corner.
Mhm.
The fighters in Beit Hanun, when they're saying there's cameras everywhere, like, buddy, there's been videos published, open source videos published for 400 days showing you there's cameras everywhere.
Mhm.
But they don't actually see the fighters because the fighters are in their own neighborhoods.
Yeah.
And so the Israelis are like, oh, we cleared this road, which is what they say in their field reports about Beit Hanun, is that they thought they had this road cleared. They didn't see anyone. Then people say they deployed without seeing a single fighter, which is also just a brutal indictment of the crimes that they committed. They
Yeah.
killing thousands, tens of thousands of people and saying they never saw a fighter. They're
Yeah.
killing.
And
You can find more reports in the Israeli media which passed through the military censor of
yeah.
people massacring children, elderly people, shooting people from a distance than you can
Yeah, like that we
find
felt like
any
the
fighter.
Nazis that we felt like the Nazi story that you
But you
guys
don't
talked
have
about in
any
here.
hero stories where the guys were like, and we were stuck in a 6-hour gunfight, pinned down.
Just on October 7th. Just just the kibbutz guys on October 7th, right?
Yeah.
Those are the only hero stories that they have.
I
Um
just, the world, I just hope that these videos come back. I just hope that all these videos that these guys made just haunt them forever and they spend their whole
well,
lives.
yeah.
That's the only justice.
If these aren't crimes, then there's no such thing as a crime and anybody can do whatever they want, right? I
Yeah.
mean, so okay, so the military question is paramount. Attrition, I think, was the fundamental issue, but I do think we have to mention Trump.
Seems
Something,
like it.
the timing of this, there's no way that could not be Trump. And speaking of indicators, like Jeffrey Sachs, who was like the original Chicago boy from the 80s who restructured Russia and Bolivia and then had like a some kind of moment of truth where he changed his mind about everything and became very anti overthrowing foreign governments and anti some kind of anti-imperialist academic. Um and Trump circulated a video of Jeff Sachs at a lecture calling Netanyahu a deep dark son of a bitch. And Trump circulates this like leftist professor calling Netanyahu a son of a bitch. And everybody's just like, why did Trump circulate that? That was like a couple of weeks before, right?
Yeah, and then there's the Steve Witkoff character who is who is basically the most pro Netanyahu guy you
Right.
could find. So somehow Trump dispatched this guy that has absolutely no diplomatic or
Yeah.
military history. He's just a real estate developer who was part of the normalization of the Gulf states.
He's the art of the deal.
And he just goes and says, "You're
And
meeting me now."
and they tell him, sorry, it's Shabbat. And he says, your Shabbat is of no interest to me.
Yeah. And yeah,
Yeah.
and then but yeah, it's there's definitely something to it, but I don't know what was the hell that Trump was going to bring. I mean, partially I was like
I
waiting
had
for that when
questions.
he's like the yeah.
What were
And
you gonna bring?
when Trump did say that, he was like, "There's going to be hell to pay for everybody, for Hamas," and then
He
he's
said
about
that
to
for
say,
everybody?
he said, "Yeah, he's about to say for
Oh,
Israel," but he goes for Hamas, for everybody.
oh,
But it's like in
interesting.
his like
In
stream of
his way.
consciousness, it was like he was about to say for
I didn't know he
everybody.
said it. I only saw the written tweet with all the capital letters and so on,
Yeah,
or
he
should I
said there's
written
going to be
truth?
hell to pay, and then he said it's going to be hell for. He said, I don't want to dis. I mean, he just did the classic Trump. He's like, I
Yeah,
don't want to say it, and then he says it. I don't want to
yeah,
disrupt your negotiations, but let me just say, if there's not a deal done, there's going to be hell to pay, and it's not going to be good for anybody. Who's the
yeah.
anybody? And like, what hell could you bring at
What
that
other
point when
hell is
he
there?
said that?
Yeah,
The internally displaced camps were floating away. Like, what was the
yeah.
hell that you were going to bring on Gazans? Gazans were asking to
The,
die
yeah.
because the torture of living every day through this devastation was worse. There was no hell to
There's no
pay
other hell.
for Hamas. So what?
No, this hell is plenty of hell. But the thing is, like when he said that, and he said, you know, I want it done by the time I get in. It was like I don't know. There's something about the way that he talks only about the Israeli interests, and yet he's the one that brought the ceasefire. And then you compare that to Blinken and Kamala Harris and Biden, all of whom were like, crocodile tears
Yeah.
about the Palestinians while doing the genocide. So it's like it's just like my mind is exploding here because it's
Yeah.
like
And the
the,
Steve Witkoff guy who did it, he went to Trump's speech before Congress and he said that it was a spiritual experience. That when they gave him all the standing ovations and like a bunch of
Netanyahu's speech. You mean
Democrats,
you said
yeah.
Trump's, but you meant
Oh, I
Netanyahu's
meant
speech.
When Netanyahu spoke before Congress,
Wow,
Steve Witkoff went as a guest of Trump's
wow.
and he said that it was a spiritual experience and he was like kind of like struggling for the word to describe just how incredible all these standing ovations were. He didn't send his like henchmen whatever, like he
Yeah.
sent Netanyahu's main guy. So this is the part of the deal that I don't trust, right?
This is the art of the deal that I don't trust.
Yeah,
Yeah.
what did he say to Netanyahu? Because Netanyahu wants stage one done. Phase one, the language in the deal is phase. Phase
Mhm.
one is the humanitarian release. That's where a bunch of Americans get out. That's where the people
Mhm.
that should have got out in last year in November get out. Those are the people that Netanyahu needs to see released. But he couldn't get those, and Kassam wouldn't give them those people because Kassam said right away in November of 2023, this deal is done. If you're going back to war, the
Yeah.
price is changing for this
Yeah.
deal. And if this deal is correct in the way that the wording that was leaked is, they're getting 250 life sentences out of prison for the humanitarian release. These were the people that in November were 3-1, 3-1,
Yeah.
3 prisoners, not 3 life sentences, 3 prisoners for one. And now it's 250 life sentences for the same people that Israel
Yeah.
could have gotten for 3 prisoners, any
And
prisoners.
well, I mean, yeah, we don't have to go over in circles, but like those are the the humanitarian release. It's like it's it's just so it would have been so easy, and there's so much blood that was shed for literally no reason. No reason.
Worse than no reason. From an Israeli
Yeah.
perspective, this is the thing that will haunt Netanyahu, not the
Yeah.
genocide. In
Yeah.
Israel, it's not the genocide that will haunt him. It's the releasing 250 prisoners who had life sentences, who people can say they are responsible for killing, and they do. They already do it. You can see it already happening in Israel. Individual families in Israel being like, it better not be the people who killed my family. It better not be the keep people from this operation or that operation.
Well, I mean, that's another
So is
fascinating
is
thing
he
about
giving
Israeli.
him, are they letting these people in phase 1 out and then going back to the war? Because that's what Netanyahu believes is happening.
Well,
And that's what
yeah.
Army Radio believes is happening. Army Radio believes they're going back into the Netzarim corridor if they leave, that they're going back into the Rafah
Right.
crossing if they leave.
Right. But yeah,
But
so
that's not what the
then
deal says.
it's not what the deal says. And the only question is what's the state of the Israeli army, whether they can do that or not, more morale wise, especially, but equipment and everything else. But like Israeli psychology is a good portion, maybe most of them want to hold Palestinian prisoners more than they want to free Israelis,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And
They
that's
want to
like,
kill, and they wanted to kill Palestinians more than they wanted to free the people who lived in the Gaza envelope who were captured
yeah.
on October 7th.
And they want those things, and that's the other kind of question, that's the kind of open question about Israel, is now that Israelis know what Israelis are, and now that Israelis know more about what Israel is, like, is that a viable society?
No. I mean, we no, this is it's and then if they're not going to go through, if they go through with this deal,
Yeah.
the prisoner exchange, because this is the thing, is even Netanyahu, he won't speak about it. He said, I'm not going to speak about it until the final deal is done. In the week leading up to it, they were saying that it's a hostage deal. It's a hostage deal. It's not a ceasefire. It's not a
Right.
ceasefire. It's a hostage deal. These are separate things. The document doesn't say they're separate things.
Right.
The
Right.
document says they're tied together.
Because it's a hostage deal, because that's what the Israelis want, and it's a ceasefire because that's what Hamas wants, or like that's what the Palestinian side wants. So you're not going to get the hostages. That's what they keep saying, except for prisoners and
Well, Netanyahu wants to get as many as he can. That's kind of the idea, which is itself is like, I don't know. Did you watch this show last week? I read out a quote from Salah Aruri last week, that he did on Israeli television, where he said that the fact that it was after the Shalit deal, and he was like, the fact that your country
yeah,
is willing to go to war over one
isn't good.
soldier
Yeah,
is a good thing. He
it's to
said,
your credit. Yeah,
I wish your society wouldn't do that, because then your society would collapse.
and
And
here we are.
here we are.
And then, so the last thing is, apparently, I'm told that in the last phase of the deal, is it 4 phases, 3 phases?
3.
3 phases, 42 days each.
Well, yeah. So it's written that they all are entwined, and basically the humanitarian part happens, and those dates for that are pretty clear. The dates, the second phase is completely has to be negotiated, and
I
who it
see.
is and how it's happening has to be negotiated. And so the idea is that phase one is 42 days. All the phases are supposed to be 42 days. But if there's not an agreement on phase two, phase one extends indefinitely. And that's where the wiggle room for Netanyahu is. And that's the question of whether Trump is actually, because
Doing that.
Trump says that he's the best for Israel ever, and he's
Yeah.
like, he's not playing hardball with Israel. We haven't seen that. So
I think he had to have played hardball with Israel unless or this deal wouldn't have happened even this far. No?
yeah, I mean that Netanyahu was waiting for Trump, right? The day in the
Yeah, he
summer
was
when
hoping
Biden said
exactly.
he wasn't running anymore, basically from that moment on, that's when all the games started. Netanyahu started making, no, it's about the Philadelphia corridor. This is about he started making basically buying time.
And now we're gonna see Democrats and liberals trying to sell themselves on the basis that they are better for Israel and they're better for genocide. Um,
And they lost an election over it.
and they were willing to lose an election over it.
Yeah.
They're so principled. And uh, the one thing is in phase three, this is kind of the last thing that I have that I want to make sure we mention. Phase three of the deal includes actually lifting the siege so that
Yeah.
Palestinians can come and go as they please and trade as they please and so on.
Yeah. It's supposed to be a
And
massive reconstruction.
that is that's new. Like it hasn't been the case since like 2005, I think. Right? Gaza's been under siege. Israel decides everything that comes and goes, and that's supposed to change.
Well, that's
Now,
supposed that was Sinwar's those are Sinwar's principles.
there was never any leverage to make that happen in the past because that was in the 2014 deal as well, I believe.
Yeah.
Uh, but this time there is. This time there's Ansar Allah, and Ansar Allah in Yemen has said they've always said we are going to blockade Israel until the siege of Gaza is lifted. And I don't see them backing off of that.
No, there was a statement they made tonight that basically sounded like they're not going to be sending Palestine to missiles,
They're not
but
going to be sending Palestine 2 missiles. But they also said we are monitoring very closely for any violations.
yeah.
And I think the fact that they can hit Israel and they can blockade Israel's trade will play a role in whether Gaza's siege is eventually lifted or not. Because that's the biggest.
Yeah. Well,
That's the
that's Sinwar's condition, right? Sinwar said that the siege is warfare. So there
yeah.
was not going to be a ceasefire agreement with the Qassam brigades that did not lift the siege because
Yeah.
they consider the siege to be warfare.
But in military terms, if Qassam has to fight a ground war with Israel invading Gaza, uh, as the only leverage that they have, as opposed to Yemen being able to do attacks from afar and oppose a blockade for a blockade. I just think this is a new part of the story that I think is really, really gonna help Gaza a lot.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to still be
Yeah,
determined. This is
there is.
one of the least clear ceasefires that you could
Yeah.
ask for, I
At the
think, at
end of
this
one of
point.
the at the end of the clearest genocide that we've ever seen.
Yeah.
So until Sunday at least, we've got to tell our listeners to hang in there.
Yeah, because they Army radio sent out a message today. They wanted everyone to know that the war has resumed in Gaza.
Mm.
That like they're gonna make the most of these next
Which is
72
also one
hours.
of the sickest, most
Sickest.
evil things that you can ever like. They already know they already know their and they have a deal for a ceasefire on Sunday. Like,
Yeah. Can you imagine if you were one of those captives and you were
yeah,
in the tunnel and you were listening to army radio and they were like, Netanyahu's just wait until Sunday.
mhm,
And from now until Sunday, we have no idea where you are, but we're gonna
mhm,
bomb indiscriminately in
yeah,
random places that don't have any connection to the battle because Israel's proved that their fighting has no connection to the battle.
yeah,
Otherwise, they'd be fighting in Beit Hanun. Like, if there was a battle, you didn't win the battle in Beit Hanun. So
no,
if the goal was to win the war, you would be fighting in Beit Hanun. You wouldn't have left and gone into Rafah. You wouldn't have left Rafah and gone back to Shifa Hospital. You wouldn't just roam all around randomly destroying. You would have stayed until you won a battle. But that wasn't the goal. That was never the goal.
they never stayed until they won a battle, unless
No.
you count the destruction of hospitals as battles.
Yeah.
I'm still bitter, man. I don't feel the like euphoria.
No. I did not feel anything today.
So I guess we'll see. All right, guys. Thanks, John.
Thanks, Justin.
We'll come back. We'll be back before the end.
You'll
This
see
is
us
not
again.
gonna be this is not gonna be our last video. Not yet.
And Electronic Intifada live stream is tomorrow, Thursdays now.
Thursdays now. You didn't miss it
You didn't
today.
miss it if you're watching right now.